And now, without further ado, our final speaker before we break for lunch, representing General Mike Murray, who couldn't be with us this morning, is another member of the Army aviation community, Lieutenant General Jim Richardson, the Deputy Commanding General of the new Army Futures Command and the leader of the cross-functional teams.
Thank you, sir. Well, thank you very much. When you look out at the future of Army aviation and the future of Army, you just look across the exhibit hall. And this is our future. And I'm excited about our future, and I'm excited about the job that we're undertaking at this time. And I would tell you that it's really humbling to be here today and to be here last night for all the Hall of Fame inductees. What a wonderful group of heroes that we inducted last night. And my hat is off to them. It's wonderful. You had your Vice Chief of Staff of the Army this morning pinning the Silver Star on some fine Screaming Eagles, our old brigade bill. It doesn't get any better than that. But today I'm going to talk to you about the future and Army Futures Command. Its future, my wife talked yesterday about readiness. Well, today I'm going to talk about future readiness. And that's why we're here today. And what I'm going to really talk about is why AFC. What has changed? And I will tell you that what has changed is the Army's willingness to admit we had a problem about 3 years ago. We stood up and we said, we have a problem with future modernization efforts, and we're going to fix it. General McConville said this morning, it's about winning, and winning matters, right? And winning is looking at the future of our Army and our modernization efforts and the great power competition that requires us to modernize. And I don't think there's a single person in this audience today that does not believe that the rate of innovation continues to accelerate. And so when you go back and you look back 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, when General Milley came on board as our Chief of Staff, did we have a plan? Did we have an organization that was solely looking at the future of our Army, looking across the future force modernization enterprise? And the answer was no. And I will tell you that General Murray said it best in Huntsville, Alabama a few weeks ago when he said, if you don't know where you're going, any road gets you there. And oh, how so true. And just go back three or 4 years ago. Many of you sitting in the audience were in the building. Where were the synchronization and integration of our future force modernization? Where was that taking place? That was taking place with the Big Four. The Secretary, the Chief, the Vice, and the Under. And all of us, many of us in the audience today were in those meetings. And I will tell you, when you make the Chief of Staff of the Army a staff officer, it's not fun. And I think all of you know that. But before I talk about ASC, let's talk about how we got here. And really, it started right before General Milley's confirmation for Chief of Staff of the Army, when the United States Congress and Senator McCain didn't like the way the Army was going in the future. We had many, many failed programs, and he pointed that out to us continuously. And those of you that are in this audience today that had to testify, you bore the brunt of that. And so a small group of people got in a room back in Washington, D.C. Actually, it was at General Milley's house, and some of the people are here today that were in that room. And they came up with a plan, and they started thinking about where we need to go in the future and the modernization. Simultaneously, at the same time, the National Defense Authorization Act of 16 came out. And the Congress stated in that act that the services would develop a plan to link and streamline requirements, acquisition, and budgeting, and come up with a plan for metrics. That NDAA came out, and 2 weeks later, I received orders to come to Washington, D.C. And I I will tell you, you know my background. Been in the unit my entire life, and I didn't understand. I'd never been in TRADOC, never been in the acquisition world, and it's been a learning experience for me for the last couple of years. But we put a plan together. We brought a team together for 2.5 years, and I will tell you, it's probably the hardest thing that I have ever done in my entire life. I thought combat was hard, but breaking those rice bowls was tough. We established an organization, and they asked me what was it going to be called. I said, sir, we'll be called the Special Advisor for Program Integration. Our acronym is SAPI, because I'm going to need my SAPI plates in the Pentagon. The chief said, that's not a good idea, Jim, so we'll rename you something else. But for 2 years, we worked specifically, brought a team together, went back to the captain's career course, and started mission analysis. And what I found, there was probably 30 or 40 studies that had been on, acquisition reform, but nobody had ever executed those studies. And we paid a lot of money for those studies, and we looked at those studies, and we developed, with a great team, we developed 9 directives for then Acting Secretary of the Army, Ryan McCarthy, to sign. And it was really getting after the process. And I think there was great efforts made in that process, and I think we were able to streamline the process. And right before AUSA, they brought me in, I laid out the process, and they said, Jim, when your group was looking at acquisition reform, what did you see? What did we need to change? And I said, sir, first of all, yes, we need to change process, but we need to look at an organization to lead this effort across the Future Force Modernization enterprise who synchronizes and integrates all of our efforts. And sir, I believe that we need an organization. And we looked at authorities as well. But to be honest with you, we didn't need any additional authorities. We need to take care of business in-house. And so those efforts led to AUSA, where the announcement was made. And then the next AUSA, the announcement was made that we're going to stand up Army Futures Command. We went FOC about 6 months ago. IOC about 6 months ago. In July, we will be FOC. Right now, the headquarters is in Austin, Texas. We're about 40% manned. We're working on our hiring right now. I will tell you that the headquarters will be about 500 people. We're streamlined. It's not going to be a 1,000-man headquarters. We're going to be a flat structure to get after change. If you could go back a slide, please. And we started working. In January, we brought ARCIC underneath Army Futures Command, and now we've renamed them the Futures and Concepts under Lieutenant General Eric Wesley. In February, we brought RDECOM underneath our organization. So when you look at Futures Command, everybody thinks Futures Command, everybody thinks, Austin, Texas. Futures Command is all over the United States. And it's a strong command. And I tell you that I am very proud to be in this command, and it's exciting times. But when you look at why, and what were the problems, and why should we do this, if you look at the slide, it really stands out. When you see that over the past 20 years, our competitors, have been focused on the future. We have been focused, rightly so, on Iraq and Afghanistan. Have we lost overmatch? Are we losing overmatch? Yes, in some areas. But more importantly, when you look at why we needed to stand up Futures Command, you look at the institutional problems. When you look at those institutional problems, you would see the first book, the lack of a coherent vision of the future. Really, that led to where we're going today with the Army's 6 modernization priorities. It gave us a vision, priorities, where to place the money, and where we needed to go for the future, and that's what we needed. You'll see frequent contrasting views before, without the priorities. Many days I stood in many AROCs where CDIDs and COEs were coming in and laying out requirements. And the first thing you would do is look at the enemy situation, right? You got the enemy situation, the friendly situation, and we need to fill a gap. But every time I looked at the enemy situation, it was different. It was based on that piece of equipment. So we've standardizing that. No one was driving the Army to the future. I can tell you now we are driving the Army toward the future. With the Chief and the Secretary's priorities, 6 priorities, you've all heard about the night court. And I know many of you are concerned about night court. But I will tell you what the leadership of the Army is doing is putting the money towards the priorities. And we in aviation and FVL, we're priority number 3. That's hard work, but a lot of great work has gone into that, and I think it'll pay dividends in the future. When you look at our processes, I talked about the 8 directives, but they were dysfunctional, right? There was not unity of command. Take a requirements document. What we found out was progress was slowed because we were going through people that could say no. Today, we only staff documents through those who can say yes. And so when you look at our requirements process, for an example today, you'll see we've gone from 3 to 5 years to 3 to 5 months. We're writing those requirements as a combined arms team. It's not just the TICM and the capability developer, especially in the CFTs. It's a team. We found, and looking at our past studies, why have our programs failed? Well, if you go back and look at the requirements documents, you'll see that the requirements that we wrote back then were not technologically achievable. And the first thing we did was we brought the science and technology community on board. They were huge dividends. You heard my wife talk about readiness today. 70% of the bill is in sustainment, sustaining that equipment over 25 years. You've got to get those requirements right on reliability, sustainability, and maintainability up front. It's extremely important. And what we learned from the past that we're doing today was we're doing this with a combined arms effort. And once those documents are written, we're only staffing it with those people who can say yes. So it's made a huge difference. Slow delivery. Delivery is just not on the acquisition perspective. It starts from the beginning. It starts from the requirements process. It starts in our S&T community that's supposed to spin in technologies. It's about output with those guys. And I will tell you that's one of General Murray's key priorities in the S&T community is to spin in those technologies to our equipment that we're going to buy today. We're also looking at how do we go faster from an acquisition perspective, trying to change the culture from a risk-averse culture and get after it. Well, we go back to the studies. We wrote requirements documents that were not technologically achievable. So what do you do? Well, what you do is you bring a team together, you experiment, you design, build, and test during an experimentation, and you inform writing that requirements document. So when that document is written and you've already designed, built, and tested that piece of equipment, EMD becomes much shorter. Testing becomes much shorter. And the bottom line is it puts reliable equipment in the hands of warfighters much faster. The other thing with slow delivery, all of you know, we've got about 3,000 programs out there. We now have priorities. We're funding those priorities. It gets into vertical modernization versus horizontal modernization. And it's not the haves and have-nots anymore. And General McConville talked about that today. So those are some of the things that we're looking at. Some of the problems from the past that we have learned from. And so when I go to the next slide, it became very obvious that we needed a headquarters, that we needed a command, that the chief and the secretary had a 4-star general that they could put his finger in his chest and be responsible and accountable. You've got that with a Force Comm commander with readiness, or the AMC commander with sustainment, or the TRADOC commander, but we didn't have a 4-star. And when we sat around the table looking at our mission, it became very easy. And I will just tell you, our mission is to put reliable equipment into hands of warfighters faster. We're not going to grow reliability on the backs of soldiers with our future force. Okay? That is our mission. This is our headquarters. And I'll just start from the left to right. You'll see the 75th Innovation Command. That's a reserve command that the United States Army Reserve stood up about a year and a half ago. They're in direct support of our command. These are reservists that have daytime jobs at Google, Microsoft. They're all over the United States. They're our scouts for technology. We're utilizing them in many ways. We have in our Army Applications Lab, they're coming together, and they're already pointing out a lot of things that we have not considered as we look toward the future. So the reserve component in our organization is extremely important as we go forward. ATEC. ATEC is in direct support of Army Futures Command. ATEC does not fall under Army Futures Command, but they are in direct support, and General Murray prioritizes the testing of ATEC, which means we're prioritizing the testing of the 31 efforts of the cross-functional teams as it relates to testing. And I will tell you get a lot of scrutiny. Joel Tyler gets a lot of scrutiny with General Murray when it comes to testing on our CFT efforts. You can see that General Murray has quite a few advisors, and he's hired about 50% of the advisors, and it's going well. But when you go down this wiring diagram and you look at that line that runs from me to the 8 CFTs, the 8 cross-functional teams, we subsumed the 8 cross-functional teams as soon as we stood up. They were under me to begin with, and we just brought them into the fold. I know everybody's about future vertical lift, but I will tell you that I'm about all the cross-functional teams, because we fight as a combined arms team. And all 8 of those cross-functional teams are extremely important. 6 of them are based on the Chief of Staff of the Army's, or the Secretary and the Chief's priorities, right in line with the priorities. The other 2 is STE and PNT. And PNT is assumed space. And so they cut across all of our cross-functional teams and cut across how we're going to fight in the future. There's 31 efforts that the CFTs are taking on, and they're our priority efforts. The key is, people always ask, well, what are the CFTs' roles? And I will tell you that the CFTs have left and right limits. Their left limit starts with the operational concept. Their right limit stops when they've written a requirements document. And what do you do in between there? You experiment, you demonstrate technology, you prototype, you design, you build, and you test, and you inform that requirements document. And that's what all of these CFT directors are focused on right now. And are they getting the money? Absolutely. Are they getting the money in accordance with their priority? Absolutely. And more importantly, the key aspect that we're doing up in AFC is the integration and the synchronization across those cross-functional teams. Extremely important. They can't be stovepiped. When you have a sensor deep, you not only should FVL be getting that data, but NGCV should be getting that data. That data should be pumped in right into these vehicles. It shouldn't be pumped into a ground control station, sitting there with an MI guy who's going to analyze it for a couple of days. That's what we're looking at. How do you fight the future battlefield? And these directors, hand-picked directors, general officers, are really doing a phenomenal job. And I would tell you that they've only been stood up 15 months, and they're already making a difference. We're fielding to the first unit the night vision goggle binocular in October. 15 months from the time a CFT stands up to the time we're putting equipment in warfighters' hands. That's unheard of. And if you haven't worn those goggles, hands down the best goggles that I've seen, with both white phosphorus and thermal sights. I wish we'd have had them back in Afghanistan. So these gals and guys are making a difference. These CFTs operate as a combined arms team. The PM is a member of that cross-functional team. The science and technology community is a member. The acquisition logistician, contracting, everybody working together and everybody having a voice in those particular programs. Very proud of what these guys do. They keep us extremely busy. And I will tell you that they get direct guidance, leadership every Monday morning at 10:45 from the Secretary of the Army and the Chief of Staff of the Army. In fact, we had the aviation one yesterday. When you look at Army, the future is AI. And what we found was when we started looking at what we're doing in AI from an Army perspective, it was kind of stovepiped. It wasn't kind of, it was stovepiped, right? The Air Force was outspending us 5-1. So we have stood up an AI task force at Carnegie Mellon, and these guys have just finished their strategy and they just had their plan approved. They've only been stood up for 4 months. They're hiring people, they're moving out, and they're integrated within the 8 cross-functional teams. Important. It's about synchronization and integration. Another organization that falls under Army Futures Command is the Army Applications Laboratory. These guys are located down in Austin. A group of hand-picked people. What is their role? Their role is to go out and find disruptive technology. That's what their job is. To not go to your standard OEM. Go out, find technology, and then spin that technology back into one of our weapon systems. They're also there to compete with some of our other organizations, our science and technology communities. They have many projects where they're competing with our labs. Sometimes I'll look at a project or a program that the lab is working on, and you know science and technology is a long process. And if you see a problem area that they're working, it may take 10 to 20 years to figure out a problem, we'll give them some money and tell them you got 2 years to go find it. And so they're working out, they've got a lot of projects, they got their hands full. And that director of systems integration, that's the center of gravity of our organization. That's where the synchronization and integration across the entire Future Force Modernization enterprise happens. And that's going to be led by a general officer. When you look at futures and concepts, just came underneath us in January, right? Eric Wesley's got his hands full. Right now he's focused on MDO 2.0, looking deep. Right? You've heard of MDO 1.5. Well, Eric's looking past 1.5. He's working on the Army's modernization strategy that will be released this summer. And I will tell you, it's taken a different look at how the strategy is from last year to this year, because we're looking across DOT-1PF. It's just not the M piece of a modernization strategy. So a lot of great work is going into that, and I think you all will see that coming out this summer. And General Murray is also, that Eric wrote up, has just published the modernization annual mission guidance. We needed that, because if you look below, everybody was working on a lot of different efforts. From a requirements perspective, across the community, working in aviation, we were working in our lane. So now you're getting top-down guidance, what we want you to focus on across the Future Force Modernization enterprise, and we just now published that about a couple of weeks ago. A great document that's going to kind of get us all rowing in the same direction and getting after those modernization priorities. In February, RDECOM fell underneath Army Futures Command. We moved it from AMC out underneath, and they fell underneath the command. And people always ask, well, what's going to be different? Well, number one, it's about output in our science and technology community. And we're going to demand output, right? And we're going to break the old culture between the PM and the S&T community and putting a maneuver spin on it. But more importantly, it's the integration. It's the integration between futures and concepts. When futures and concepts develop a concept and there's a gap, well, guess what? We're nested We're located together, and the S&T community now is working on those gaps to solve those gaps for the future. It's all about integration and synchronization, and you'll see those arrows down below. And then lastly, we just got Major General Pat Burton from ASALT in, who's going to be our Combat Systems Directorate, who really is helping us at our level work with the PMs and PEOs to make sure we're integrated and synchronized. He's in direct support of us from Dr. Jetty, and just hit the ground running. So when you look at this organization, I think we're close. We're building this plane in flight. We may not have it right, but we will change. We're flexible, agile, a small organization that's flat, that's all about about putting reliable equipment in the hands of warfighters faster. That is what we're about. Next slide. And as we go forward, really, when we look toward the future, what is this organization about? Well, we're going to MDO, to an MDO capable force in 2028, right? And an MDO ready force in 2023. It's about the structure. It's about how we're going to fight, be organized for the future, and equipped for the future with one organization responsible for the integration and synchronization. And it's all tied into multi-domain operations. At the end of the day, this organization is not about today. It's about our children, and it's about our grandchildren. It's about putting reliable equipment in the hands of soldiers, faster, more streamlined, with a better product. That's my brief for today. I think I took my 29 minutes. That's where we are. That's where you understand where we're headed. And plus or minus 30 seconds. So thank you very much.